Terrific. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this town hall hosted by YANA, the Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance. My name is Ken Inadomi. I'm the YANA chair, and it's my pleasure to welcome you. This is an extraordinary time, as we all know. So for tonight, we're going to hopefully just take 60 minutes to learn from each other, to get support from each other, because really the town hall is something that really YANA does best. What we like to do is bring people together, share information, support each other, and hopefully build community. And that's what tonight's all about. We've invited several speakers that are leaders in their field, and I can't wait to hear them. And the evening will be anchored with a presentation by the leaders from Dwight Hall. Dwight Hall is the largest student-led, campus-based social impact organization in the country. And we'll be hearing from Peter Crumlish and Sasha Thomas on that. But before we get to our speakers, I just want to go over some of the ground rules for tonight. Everyone is on mute. If you want to express yourselves, please use the chat function. We found that really minimizes crossover noise. The second thing is please activate your video so we can see your faces. That really helps build this sense of humanity among us. And the third thing I'd like to mention is that for tonight's forum, please no solicitations for your organizations or your causes. There will be a forum for that, but not tonight. And if you'd like to have additional information on any of our speakers, you can contact me directly or Rachel directly, and you can get our information through our website. Before we get to the first speaker, I just want to express my personal gratitude for all of the people out there, whether it's yourself or people in your family or your friends or your network, people that are still frontline, healthcare providers, medical providers, people in food delivery, food service, transportation, at grocery stores, at pharmacies. So many people are still keeping our society moving. Everyone cannot work remotely. And for the people that are actually still there and serving, you have our ultimate gratitude. So thank you so much for that. Now let's get into our first speaker, and I will, in a sense, act as tonight's moderator, introducing each speaker as they come up. First is Rachael Littler. She is the executive director over the past year at YANA. She's done an extraordinary job, and she's going to describe some of the things that the organization has been focusing on over the past 10 days. Rachael?
Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to try to share my screen to show some things. Wanted to remind everyone about the YANA website, and thank you to Joellyn and many other people in our network who've provided us with resources and also helped us create the survey we sent out. The first thing I wanted to show you is if you click on our resources page on our homepage, we have a new slider there and a new page that is under what we do. We're going to keep populating this with information. The resources, we've put in a whole bunch of resources related for nonprofits and funders primarily during the COVID-19 crisis. These are everything from information on nonprofits have questions about insurance coverage, a lot of stuff on fundraising. Joellyn is going to get into that. Best practices, a whole bunch of resources. Hopefully, if anybody just wants a one-stop shop, I do highly recommend the National Council of Nonprofits, which is run by Yale alum Tim Delaney. They're really at the forefront of a lot of this, and you might know their work through the local nonprofit organization in your state. But he's the guy that runs all that and has been helping to lobby Congress with respect to making sure nonprofits, from our perspective, are included in the packages and other kinds of legislation, federal and state, that we may not always think about, but he's there doing that for us. And we're also adding some general resources on just good resources to get to, funding, governance, and we'll keep adding this. So please continue to look at that. And if you have anything you think we should really add, let us know and we'll vet it and put it up there. I wanted to jump quickly to the survey results that we did. We sent this out a few weeks ago. It is on our page. So if you go to our post and you click on the post, there's a link that says show the results. So this will show up as a slide. There's a button here you can actually take the survey. That's great if you haven't done it, right? Just check, we have about 76, 77 responses. and please share this. We have 5,800 people in our contacts, but this is open. We're happy. I know there may be some other organizations out there that are doing this. This is sort of our network. And we're seeing that the majority of, the respondents are staff members at nonprofits, and the other major portion are board members. Most of the people are working in urban areas and at small nonprofits with 1 to 5 staff members. And then we have another big chunk that are quite large, but the sort of big chunk of the small number of staff is sort of the bread and butter of who we provide services to. And most of them are service providers who rely on donation grants and other fundraising to fulfill the mission. There's a little bit of a chart there on location. This kind of reflects the fact that we had started our survey to the Connecticut, New Jersey, New York area. But so the geographic spread is just a sampling, we think, mostly consistent in the answering. And some of the takeaways are, like many of you, most of the many of the nonprofits are having to cancel events and galas, and that we kind of caught people in the heyday of the emotion of that, expecting major short-term disruptions. Everyone seems to be working on adjusting their plans at work for themselves and their own staff, conference calls, limiting their travel, doing remote working. And a lot of them have said it's just too soon to tell, and they're just trying to do triage. A lot of the major key issue, and so we want everyone to remember that you're not alone, is that this level of uncertainty and stress about what the effects are going to be long-term on giving and fundraising and the ability to deliver on the mission is really what's top of mind. And you think about everybody who's a nonprofit has to deal with that, has dealing with this, and think about some of the hardest hit, or not only the nonprofits like hospitals, but also in homeless shelters, but also education. You know, we get a lot of what's happening with the students, but there's a whole army of administrators who are working on the end, who are dealing with K-12, after school programs, all that kind of stuff, and having to scramble and think about how do they work with their clients now in this environment. A lot of our respondents, and we know nonprofits, are looking for insights and best practices on preparedness, business continuity plans, succession plans. I know a lot of organizations did this back after 9/11. I think, you know, somebody might have done that, but that's something we probably need to bring back to the forefront for nonprofits to help them with that. Fundraising, and then just wanting to get facts and support and share community. That's major issues for the nonprofits right now. And then, so we also have some other resources there, and we're duplicating this, so you can just check back on our website from now on. And I think that's all. I just wanted to say thank you to those who are participating. Thank you to those who answered the survey. Please pass that along, provide us information. Also, a huge thank you to those. We asked a question on behalf of Dwight Hall and Career Services at Yale, just to put them feelers out there. If there are nonprofits who think they might have either volunteer opportunities or internship opportunities that can be done remotely, either work right now or could be done as a summer internship, we're trying to kind of help collect that information as Dwight Hall and other facilities on campus get a better understanding of how students are going to be able to fulfill their internship interests and needs, and a lot of the social impact work they've already been doing. So to the extent we can supplement that, thank you for, and please feel free to send me any information if you have ideas. So I will stop sharing my screen, Ken, and I should be able to pass it on to you to go to the next person in line.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Next speaker is Joellyn Gray. Joellyn is a marketing and fundraising expert, and she's been combing a lot of the resources out there that can help nonprofit leaders manage and navigate through this crisis. Joellyn?
Great, thank you. I wanted to share a presentation here, so let me bear with me for a second. Hoping to share my screen. Can you all see it? Ken, can you see that?
Yes.
Great. Okay, perfect. Well, as Rachel said, when we did the survey, one of the, in addition to the data that we got, one of the most powerful things that came out of the survey were really the quality of the comments. The concern that people really have, the feelings of uncertainty, but very importantly, the sense of still being committed to the mission and wanting to find ways to focus their organization and think creatively about new ways in which they could navigate this challenging time that we're in. I wanted to talk to you specifically about how do we do that? How do we continue our mission and fundraise in this age of uncertainty? In the past few weeks, I've attended a number of different webinars on this and really wanted to just share with you some of the key things that I had seen. There are lots of webinars out there with messaging suggestions. One of the things they're emphasizing is reminding your donors that they are among your most important supporters. They're also out there designing new donation pages that really become much more COVID-19 specific. Even looking at this particular site, for example, they talk about how every dollar that you donate gives you $9 of food, and at their top gift level, they're talking about giving 60 emergency bags of food. There are engagement ideas popping up out there. This one on the left is actually from a local group in Connecticut that focuses on Down syndrome children, and they did a virtual DJ. But if the group on the right shows you all the different platforms that are available to you. One of the things that I noticed, I attended 3 different webinars last week, one on Join Me, one on GoToMeeting, and one on Zoom. And honestly, the Zoom platform was really powerful and consistent. There were no problems at all with it. I've heard good things about Facebook Live as well. And then there's been a plethora of, fun visuals and subject lines because no one wants to lose their sense of humor or their sense of humanity in all of this. So all of that was very helpful. But one of the best ones was honestly the one that you can access through our YANA resource page. It's by CCS Fundraising, which has been one of the key groups that has provided some of the webinars in the past. And they reminded us of the 10 different principles, really timeless principles for fundraising. And number 1, most of all, being increasing communication. That was one of the key points that the founder of CCS made in his presentation. He talked about how their experience spanned 9/11, Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, and the recession of 2008. And quite honestly, the nonprofits that stopped communicating, who felt that their mission wasn't important enough to talk about during this time of crisis, were the ones that didn't survive. So it's important to continue to communicate, but the question is, how do you communicate? What are the right ways in which you can continue to talk about that? And they had some very concrete suggestions. They talked a lot about recognizing who all of your stakeholders are, both your internal ones as well as your external ones, talking not just with staff, but with your board members, and then reaching out to all of your stakeholders, your donors, your foundation partners, even your past donors. And really communicate. God bless you. And in addition to the type of communication, which they emphasize as being highly personal, don't sit there and talk about your organization and its needs. Rather, reach out and talk to them on a personal level. Ask how they're doing, how their pets are doing, what they're going to do about coloring their hair when the hair color goes, right? All kinds of things that make it very personal so you can strengthen your relationship with them. Then work to dispel the myths that are there about your organization. I work with a local scouting group, and we had the whole issue of the Boy Scouts of America declaring bankruptcy 2 weeks before coronavirus hit. So we had a lot of myths that we have to dispel. But most important, really, really listening, letting them, your donor, talk at least 80% of the time. CCS proposed this very interesting plan. They talked about creating a 30 to 90 day plan. And we are really in week 2 and 3 of this crisis. And what are they emphasizing in that period of time? It is talking to your donors. And which donors and how do you talk to them? One of the key messages is to go to your donor list, identify the top 50 donors, and ask the board, divvy them up across all of the board members and yourselves, and make those personal calls. Now, I encountered a problem when I tried to do this with my organization. Some of the board members felt that they couldn't reach out unless they had news to share. And quite honestly, maybe organizations don't have news. Maybe they're still working with how are they going to deliver against their mission. It's important that you don't sit back and not communicate. It's important that you make that phone call, even if it's just to say, hey, do you need something at the grocery store? Can I help you? Or how's your pet doing out there? There are 2 sites that give very practical tools that are available to everyone. These are both donor management software organizations. I actually looked at the 4 major donor management organizations out there to see what they had available on their sites. And 2 of them have made a bunch of resources available. I'm just going to very quickly show you those pages. This one comes from Network for Good. And as you scroll down, you can see there's a bunch of different tips, as well as webinars that you can access. All of that's really terrific information. Bloomerang has been amazing. They've been doing webinars probably 3 or 4 a week. And in fact, if I scroll down, you can see tons of things you can access. But you can see that even tomorrow, there's one on donor communication in the wake of COVID-19. And next week, you can see there's ones on the secrets of successful virtual conferencing. I also saw ones on turning your events, your online events into more engaging ways to communicate and fundraise. And then finally, I wanted to leave you with a kind of compelling thought that literally popped in my mailbox today. It is not a Yale sponsored thing. It's actually from Wharton. But there's an interesting article in their Knowledge newsletter today on why corporate firms need to tap nonprofit partnerships. It's almost twisting the dynamic, right? It's usually the nonprofit going to the corporation and saying, hey, be my sponsor. Here the message is that solving this pandemic will require partnering with nonprofit organizations to make sure that all of our communities around the world are getting the support they need. Why? Because situations that are completely new and unexpected for the private sector are in fact business as usual for many nonprofit organizations. So that was my happy thought for today. And with that, I'll turn it back to Ken.
Thank you.
Joellyn, can you just make sure you turn off your screen share?
Yep.
Thank you.
Joellyn, thank you. Now, continuing on that, in the fundraising theme, we have Don Chen. Don is the president of the Surdna Foundation, and he's been one of the most popular speakers on the YANA circuit. But what makes Don's message so valuable is he has also been on the grantee side. He's run nonprofits before he went over to the foundation side. He's got a lot of insight to share. Don?
Thanks a lot, Ken, and I also just want to thank YANA. You all do wonderful work, and it's incredibly critical right now, especially. Can you all hear me okay? Like to see some nods? Okay, great. Thumbs, nods. Well, I hope everyone's faring well under these incredibly difficult circumstances. You know, I recognize that the audience for YANA is, we're all nonprofit, mission-driven organizations. And suddenly the context for everyone's work has changed practically overnight. And whatever your mission is, I expect you're all now facing a rapidly shifting landscape with lots of new crises and in the short term and possibly for a very prolonged period. And to further complicate things, I'm seeing that a lot of basically every possible challenge that you've ever encountered in the nonprofit world is happening simultaneously to nearly every type of nonprofit that you can think of, whether you depend on grants, fundraising events, public funding, earned revenue, or an endowment for your income. So it's all happening all at once. And then you add, of course, on top of that, there's this horrible pandemic. So it's terribly unnerving environments. I just want to express gratitude to all of you for what you do, and just recognize the seriousness of the issue that we're having to deal with. So for my remarks, I'm going to offer a few things. I'm going to offer what I've learned over the past couple of weeks in terms of what foundations are trying to do to pivot to the challenges of the day. And I'm mostly going to talk about what foundations are doing externally. There's a whole nother conversation that we could have about what's happening internally within foundations, because they are organizations filled with people as well who need to work from home and do all kinds of things to adjust to our situation. But I want to share what I've learned about that. Secondly, I'd like to offer some recommendations, and then I'll also just reflect on the future outlook as we think about what's to come over months and maybe even years to come. So with that, I'll start with what foundations are doing to respond. And I have to admit, the Surdna Foundation occupies a particular part of the philanthropic landscape. We are a social justice foundation. I think that was stamped in me from the very beginning because I was a very avid and active Dwight Hall volunteer. I was the head of YHAP, Yale Hunger and Homelessness Action Project. So, we're a social justice foundation. We tend to like to be at the forefront of philanthropic response and innovative thinking, and so this reflects that part of the landscape that we occupy. I'll just begin by saying that it's important to note that there are many different types of foundations. Those of you who are grant seekers know this. There are foundations that are responsive philanthropies. They respond to all requests, whether it's through requests for proposals or other application processes. There are some foundations that don't accept any unsolicited proposals, and they only invite proposals. There are also foundations that have endowments, and there are ones that have to raise their grant dollars every year. And there are also foundations that don't give out any grants at all. They're operating foundations, and they run programs like research or social services and programs like that. So I can say that during the past couple of weeks, I've read about, spoken to, conferred with just about every type of foundation that's trying to respond to the pandemic. And what's encouraging is that there are some good practices that are starting to emerge that multiple foundations and growing numbers of foundations are signing on to. And there are 4 big clusters that I'd like to mention during this call today. So first, and very fundamentally, many foundations, including the Surdna Foundation, recognize that we need to deeply listen to our grantees and other partners to find out what's happening, what nonprofits need during this time. And it was interesting that Joellyn mentioned that grant seekers should let their donors speak for 80% of the time, which I'm sure is exactly right. It is a sad commentary because most funders like to hear themselves talk, and they're not listening as much as they should. But I think it's good advice that Joellyn has offered. At the same time, I hope that changes. Now is the time to listen to grantees, to community-based organizations, and to the communities that we all purportedly serve. So I see that as a coalescing idea within the funder circles that I'm most attached to. Second, many foundations are trying to offer flexibility to their grantees, recognizing that nonprofits are definitely going to have difficulty meeting the requirements of current grant agreements. And this might include converting project-based funding to general operating support. We could potentially speed up grant payments to help with cash flow. We could be sympathetic and understanding that previously scheduled events and activities won't happen for a while just because of the reality of the situation. and that scopes of work may need to be adjusted. And those are all things that funders who are forward thinking are starting to realize, and offering that formally to grantees and would-be grantees is something that many of us are really devoted to. And it could be things as mundane as reducing paperwork, because we recognize that nonprofits are under a lot of stress right now. The good thing for us at the Surdna Foundation is that we've already adopted a lot of these types of practices. We trust our grantees a lot. There's a name for this bundle of practices. Sometimes people refer to it as trust-based philanthropy. And there's a trust-based philanthropy project that you can look up online if you want to learn more about that. But I hope more funders provide more general support and reduce the hoops and the burden for grantees and offer more flexibility in the future, because I think generally it's a good idea. The third cluster of activity that I see is that even though a lot of foundation endowments, and I would probably say all foundation endowments, unless somebody's especially prescient, have plummeted in value, and therefore funders are trying to figure out what they're going to be able to do in terms of grant making now and into the future. And the funders that I work most closely with are really trying hard to at least hold the line on existing grant funding, and even increase the amount of money that they're putting out into the field. And that's not going to be easy. It's not going to be the case for probably most funders, because a lot of funders are just not set up to have that kind of flexibility. But there have been clarion calls and urgent pleas from people like Voulet from Nonprofit AF and Phil Buchanan from the Center for Effective Philanthropy for foundations to step it up and boost their grant making during this crisis. Because if we're mission-driven foundations, this is the time to really come to the need of nonprofits and communities. And that may include going over the minimum 5% that we all, of course, adhere to as tax-exempt organizations, and other creative ways to get more money to grantees. And it could come in the form of giving just like 5% more to every grantee, funding new pooled funds that have been set up especially for coronavirus recovery. And many of those are geographically or sectorally focused. Many of those are focused on services and immediate relief to workers and families. And so there are lots of different ways in which those types of things could be resourced. And the Surdna Foundation is in the middle of figuring out what we're going to do. All of these require conversations with board members and donors and the like. So that's the third cluster. And then the fourth one is for those of us who are involved in impact investing, we're starting to hear from organizations that they may need, for example, a temporary, they're asking us to temporarily forego interest payments, or to make changes to loan agreements, the covenants for loan agreements, so that organizations can have more working capital to get through this economic crisis. So I think we're going to start to see more and more flexibility on that front, and that'll keep a lot of us busy in figuring out how to orchestrate those things, because many of those organizations, from our standpoint, Surdna Foundation, they're community development financial institutions. They're other organizations upon which many other nonprofits and small businesses depend. So those are four main clusters of tools and approaches that are being explored and implemented, and hopefully we'll see more and more funders act on those. And to find out more about this, I'll point your attention to a couple of resources. One is there's a call to action for Philanthropy's commitment during COVID-19, which is a pledge that you can find on the front page of the Council on Foundations website. That pledge captures a lot of what I just discussed. It currently has 355 signatories. Surdna Foundation was first in line to sign on to that pledge. And there's an open letter to grantees that was developed by the Cricket Island Foundation and the Hazen Foundation for social justice funders, and you can find that on the Philanthropy New York website and other places. So a lot of resources out there. One really important lesson that I hope we'll all learn is which of these practices, like more general support, flexibility, spending beyond the minimum 5%, and trust-based approaches will eventually be adopted, not just during a crisis, but as a permanent set of practices for funders. And that's something that we should observe over the next months and years to come. I'm going to conclude by just talking about a couple of things that you all may be grappling with based on some questions that I've already received from my fellow panelists and, of course, from our grantees and other folks. Most of you are probably wondering where to turn for emergency grant funding and other resources. And it's very fluid, but I've seen a very encouraging rise in the number of geographically targeted funds and other funds. There's a New York City COVID-19 Response and Impact Fund that was just set up, and there are many others. The Council on Foundations has a nice resource hub on its front page, and that has a lot of information about where these emergency response funds are being set up. And then the other thing I'll say is that foundations are all different, so it's hard to generalize the advice to give, but I'd say that the usual principles applied, and I think Joellyn had a lot of great advice about how to seek funds during this time. And I offer three. One is, really take the time to understand what the grant making guidelines are and write your proposals accordingly. The second one is really try to build those relationships, especially over the long term, which is something that is always helpful. It was helpful for me as a grant seeker. And then third, really try to reflect on what your constituency needs, especially if you're raising money for local communities, for particular population on a particular issue. And I'll just end my comments by noting that good communication, regular communication is so critical to all of this at a time when we can't see each other face to face. Talk with your funders, talk with them early and as often as you can manage to get their time. And I wish you all really good luck and good health.
John, thank you. Very helpful. By the way, people have been asking in chat, this entire town hall has been recorded, and you'll be able to find it on our YANA website, along with the slides that both Rachael and Joellyn have shared. Okay, so all of that will be made available. For our next speaker, we have Ted Smith. Ted is the executive director of New Heights, which is one of the leading youth development programs in New York. It basically uses sports as a gateway to youth leadership and development. Ted had just last week, he had to cancel a major fundraiser, and we thought that we'd tap into his wisdom and how he dealt with that and how they're recovering. Ted?
Sure. Thanks, Ken, and thanks to the panelists who've spoken so far. First of all, I hope everyone is staying safe and well, and I appreciate you guys all joining us. I think obviously a sense of community is really important during this time. It's encouraging for me from all the panelists. I think the two key things that I've been taking away are, one is communication. I think that can't be underscored enough, whether it's with foundations, donors, your staff. I think that's been made especially clear during this difficult time. And I think clearly making sure that everyone is focusing on, their mission and sort of what's core to their organization and focus. As Ken said, I'll focus on the actual events component. And we're still in recovery mode from that. As Ken mentioned, we run sort of a basketball and education program, which functions as a college prep program for about 250 kids across New York City. For us, fundraising events total about 50% of our annual budget. And the event that Ken was referencing that we had to cancel last week is a little over 10% of our annual budget. So I know, people on this town hall have varying levels of impact, but obviously events are a huge component for a lot of nonprofit fundraising. And so clearly we have to be, adaptive and mobile during this time. For us, as a basketball and education and college prep organization, our annual event is called Madness, which we do around the March Madness event. We always host it the first Thursday of the NCAA tournament. For those of those sports junkies on the town hall with us tonight, we had to make the decision, which we did 8 days before the event. So our event was supposed to be on the 19th for the first Thursday of the NCAA tournament. We had to cancel it 8 days beforehand. Obviously for health and safety reasons, and the safety of our donors and staff and everyone else. 2 days later, we were shown that we made the right decision because the NCAA tournament, as most of you know, was canceled anyways. So if we'd had the event, I think people would have been standing around in an empty room, staring at each other. So from our standpoint, it's a huge hit for us. We really focused, as everyone else has said, on communication. So I think, we really reached out to everyone, every individual donor and ticket sponsor that contributed to us. And I think one of the things, one of the strategies or ideas for people who have canceled or have to cancel an event, I think the first thing is to try and convert those ticket sales or sponsorships either to straight donations or to roll them over to future events that you may be having. And I know cash flow for a lot of nonprofits in this uncertain time is really critical. So I think trying to, again, through communication and relationships, reaching out to your donors and supporters to explain the scenario that you're in. Again, for us, we basically, from the revenue standpoint, got to about 50% to our total goal for the event. So obviously had a long way to go. So I think really trying to communicate with donors about what you're doing and what the plans are, and obviously if you've received money, why it's important and how it's going to matter, but having that dialogue. And I think we were fortunate through our outreach that over 80% of our supporters for the event transferred their tickets to straight donations or carried them over to future events. And so obviously at this time, every dollar matters. So I think that was, a real positive and a win for us. I think the other piece, which sort of can't be underscored, and for those of you that are in events or host events, I think is controlling the expenses for the event. From our perspective, and obviously given the, unique and unfortunate situation in which we're dealing, we were fortunate to be able to recoup, 95% of the expenses that we had for the event. So, we got all of our money back from the venue rental, from vendors that we were working with. As I say, 95% of them refunded, all of the expenses that we were going to incur from the event. So I think, again, whether it's on the donor side or the expense or vendor side, communication and relationship, you can't underscore that. We just asked, and I think people have been very sympathetic and supportive during this time. And so again, for us, to recoup, 95% of the expenses, the positive for us is that, our gross number, is almost our net number. So while it hit us on the revenue side as a hit, that we only reached about 50% of the goal, we saved 95% of the expenses. So it wasn't quite as big a hit for us. So I think obviously we're talking today about fundraising and donors and board and foundation support, but I think also, a critical thing, whether it's with fundraising or events, or also just thinking about your organization and programs, is also, the real need to take a look on the expenses side and see where you can have some savings and be reasonable with your, vendors. I think people have been very supportive and, as I say, sympathetic in these times. And I think that's something that carries over. And obviously I'm focusing on events, but I mean, I think, something as little as, I reached out to our landlord and they gave us, a month free rent based on what's going on. And so I think, with a lot of this, it's really at this time, relationships and on some levels and when done the right way. And obviously, Don spoke to this in terms of understanding, guidelines and what people are focused on, but I think, it can't hurt to ask. So I think that's one thing I also wanted to sort of mention during this time. I think one of the other things, sticking on the events component, is also what's next and what are options and alternatives. And I think a few of the other panelists have mentioned options, but I think is to be flexible and think, in our new virtual world, which is ever evolving. I think one of the things that we're thinking about, and I know other organizations are as well, is looking at sort of how do you do virtual events. And so I know Joellyn mentioned it before, and looking at resources like Boomerang and others, seeing if there are ways you can do virtual events. Doing online auctions is another thing that we have done and are exploring how to do that. So I think it's really trying to be on the fundraising and event side, be creative, and listen to your donors, as I can't restate enough. Hearing from some of our board members and key donors, what during this crazy time, what is inspiring and engaging for them, and hearing what their perspectives are. And we're coming up with some potential new ideas and new event streams and revenue opportunities that we wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So I think trying to be proactive and creative during this time is really important and really challenging. I'm sure I had a list of resources, but I think really just looking at what YANA has put together and what other panelists have said, or I'm sort of reiterating what's already been stated. So I think those are great resources. And I think the last thing I just wanted to convey is I think, again, we're all of us nonprofit folk are in this together, and I think it's trying times. And think we should try to, and again, thanks to Ken and Rachael and others for putting this together, lean on each other for support. I mentioned to Ken and Rachael, and I'm happy to share my contact information and happy to reach out and answer questions if people have thoughts or ideas, to be a support and a resource for others. Stay positive, and again, thanks for everyone's time and interest.
Ted, thank you. Thank you, very helpful. The next perspective we'd like to share is from a student. So Tim Ryan is class of 20. I think people heard or may have heard that just this week, the university officially canceled commencement. Tim is he's a Dwight Hall member. He's one of the leading social impact leaders on campus, but he's been incredibly resilient, and we've invited him to share some of the thoughts on how he and his classmates are coping with this pandemic. Tim?
Yeah, so I guess words can't really describe the level of challenge, especially and just emotional burden for the senior class during this time, being told over spring break that you have 5 days until housing is uncertain, food might be uncertain for a lot of the low-income students, and just like the whole senior spring is kind of cast into this downward spiral. I think that uncertainty element is kind of one of the biggest elements that's really been in the minds of the senior class in general, just kind of receiving email after email and kind of getting information slowly as this crisis develops. I think that in general, the senior class is very understanding of the fact that this is a global health crisis, that the response to the university is necessary, having something extreme like that, and then the government response itself also needs to be equally extreme. And so while we're still understanding of that, it's still definitely a jaded period for many individuals, grappling with a lot of students that your last goodbye to them was the last goodbye to them, and commencement was just a today announcement. And for me in particular, as someone who works a lot with the high need students on campus, the FGLI students, first generation low income college students, as well as the independent students, so those that might be emancipated minors, unaccompanied minors, estranged LGBTQ plus youth, etc., that lack a lot of familial support. This has definitely been a very intense time to be on campus, particularly those who are on campus over spring break, that received this news and then had to work with their deans. Some got approval from their deans, heads of colleges to stay on campus, but a lot of the community has also been kind of scattered throughout New Haven and throughout the country. Just given the fact that they, had 5 days of this eviction notice that has kind of definitely been on the forefront of a lot of people's minds and definitely caused a lot of chaos, just given how rapid the development of COVID-19 was compared to initial prospective numbers. and how rapidly this whole situation has kind of evolved. And so, me personally, given my intimate knowledge of, working with, grappling with housing insecurity, grappling with food insecurity, grappling with these issues, as well as my commitment to these students on campus, FDI students and the independent students, I'm someone who, I pride myself in my ability to, regardless of my own issues, jump into an issue and kind of focus all my energies on that. And so for me personally, the last 2 weeks have been really, my main focus is housing and food security for a lot of people. Yale did just announce that they're going to give prorated refunds to students, including those on financial aid, to be able to access it. It'll be a $3,600 deposit to give them that food security, housing security for those that might not have a place to go during this time. But given the slow nature of things and the level of uncertainty for a lot of people, it's kind of scattered a lot of individuals, given that this is coming a week after the date to move out, and so, or sorry, a week and a half, almost 2 weeks actually. And so for me personally, I've worked a lot with alumni, I've worked a lot with current students to create this sort of mock housing, ad hoc housing network for a lot of people. And we were very successful actually, and I helped to model it at 34 different schools. We've helped over 340 students across 34 different Ivy Plus schools across 27 different cities. We have over 107 housing units right now. Some are temporary, some are long-term. It really depends, and that's one of the most difficult things as a senior, particularly an independent student, that where you're staying, is it secure for 2 months, secure for 2 weeks? And with the recession to come, a lot of seniors, the forefront of their minds is the job market. That might be an issue. So for me personally, I focus a lot on the housing and food security aspect of things, getting myself secure, as well as these other individuals on Yale campus and also at other campuses across the country that might have responded in different ways or similar ways. Yale and Harvard seem to be in tandem. Columbia offers housing for their students permanently, but they have issues with that as well, with students that are still not practicing social distancing practices. So of course, it's a mixed basket of appropriate responses and the subsequent issues that might arise from that I'm trying to tackle right now as a current student with my own personal issues, but also for the broader community, particularly for like freshmen, for sophomores, juniors that might not be as aware of how to navigate these issues compared to like seniors that might have experience with this, or students that have been independent for a long time, that this is their first rodeo being cast into this sort of disarray, and they know how to respond to it and adapt to it pretty quickly. So I guess that's one of the biggest things. A lot of the issues the students are also facing are access to technology, access to healthcare, not being on the Yale, or being disconnected from the Yale system in particular. They might still have Yale health coverage, but those students that are in rural areas might have reliable Wi-Fi. They might not have, if your laptop died, mine personally died. Right the day after this this announcement was the day after they announced that campus was going to be closed indefinitely. And so that's difficult for a lot of students to get the loaner equipment that they're required, to get repairs that they require, just to have access to this general technology that they need to be able to adapt to online learning. There's of course the time zone issue. A lot of students that weren't approved to stay on campus. So Yale's policy was initially, it depends on what college you're in. There's a lot of discrepancy between the colleges, but those from CDC level 3 countries were, as of 2 weeks ago, were invited to stay on campus. That was predominantly Europe and China. Those that are independent, it's kind of a mixed bag as to who was approved and who wasn't. It depends on what college you're in. It depends on also like how defined your situation is. But other than that, there are a lot of high need, low income students that kind of are still in these unstable positions, or they might have gone back to home environments that aren't quite conducive to that equitable learning opportunity when you're switching and transitioning into online classes, which this being the first week of Zoom, of course, I think a lot of professors are very sympathetic to that fact, which is very fortunate. And learning to adapt to that, learning how this semester is going to go, helping people craft plans to get the participation they might need if they're in their 9 a.m. class is suddenly a 3 a.m. class or a 2 a.m. class, depending where they might be. And also adapting to the technological concerns to be able to get the work in that might be required of them throughout the semester. Other than that, I think the senior class in particular, speaking from a senior perspective, the forefront of our minds is one, the fact that a lot of the senior spring, the post spring break was supposed to be this really happy and celebratory time for a lot of us. And there's definitely a lot of, I guess jaded is the best term to use. among the senior class, there's just a lot of this denial, I guess, almost, that, you know, this time is suddenly shifted, and how to best celebrate that given the circumstances, while still, you know, recognizing and acknowledging the fact that, and being understanding of the fact that the crisis at hand is certainly warrants a sort of response. And, you know, putting health at the forefront, particularly those of our friends and family members, at the forefront of people's minds. But other than that, a lot of the concerns also in the job market. I know I personally have had every job offer I've had is currently rescinded. And those, not all of them, but about 50% of the prospects I still have are, they've told me in an email that they're putting all their hiring practices on hiatus for the next few months, some until August, some indefinitely. And I know that that's something that's echoed by a lot of the senior class in general. Which even for those independent students that might have been approved to stay on campus, definitely becomes a concern when it's you know, you have 2 months approval of food security, housing security, because Yale's also providing food for those that stayed. But, you know, post May, with the recession to come, you know, they're going to be cast in the same sort of situation that a lot of the students are in now. So it's a short-term solution to a growing problem that will definitely be on the forefront of a lot of people's minds going forward. That I guess teaching the practices to best learn how to adapt to this and snap back into it. I know that I'm personally going through a whole, you know, I'll always adapt to whatever situation is at hand. And I know that a lot of students, a lot of my fellow peers are equally resilient, but it will of course be a lot of pushback and a lot of resistance, and it'll just make the whole process a little bit more difficult. And I think teaching practices to adapt to that and equipping students as best as possible through the use of the alumni network, through the use of other networking tools, other modes of finding the position that might still be available, finding different opportunities that might not have previously heard of, that will still be able to work remotely throughout this crisis, or just in general, getting equitable information out there as to how to better adapt to the crisis and set themselves up professionally post-graduation. I think that's the majority of my spiel.
Tim, thank you. Just an amazing narrative. You and your classmates are going through and have gone through so much. We'll have some sidebars. There are people with YANA, and I know First Gen with Lisa Chapman's group. There's a lot I think that we can do together collectively. Okay, so stay tuned for that.
Thank you, Ken, and thank the YANA board as well for having me.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to segue to Dwight Hall. And again, this is just right in the same theme of Dwight Hall. I think everyone on the call knows, maybe not. I mentioned before, it is the largest student-based or student-led campus-based social impact organization in the country. Its fearless leader is Peter Crumlish, and he is joined tonight by Sasha Thomas, who I understand is the co-coordinator of the executive committee. Peter, if you want to go about 10 minutes longer, please do, because we're running a little long. So you want to go to 7:40, please take it.
I want to make sure that Sasha, who is the fearless leader of the student executive team, gets time to talk about the work that they've been doing and how they've had to adapt and pivot in this really interesting environment. So this first to sort of give the context of what this year was like. We were in a growth phase that was very exciting for us. We had committed to increasing our programming to provide more opportunities for both Yale College and graduate professional students to be involved in our work. And to do that, we set very ambitious fundraising goals, and we've been doing an amazing job. We've grown our staff also to be able to do this, and this really came like a rogue wave, sort of out of nowhere. And it also was weird as a nonprofit leader to be working in such uncertainty, because we just didn't have any of the information that we would normally expect to have. And it made it much harder to figure out what we should be doing at any given moment. But our initial response was, we need to make sure that people are safe, and that means the students are safe and the staff is safe. The students were sent home, or they were told spring break, and there was only one group of students overseas that I was able to get in contact with right away, and convince them that it was in their best interest to come back as soon as possible, which they did. And then the next phase was really figuring out, well, how do we keep operating as Dwight Hall under the circumstances? We have the staff all scattered in the different homes. They all have different home situations. Some have small children, some have limited bandwidth. Everybody's in a different location, so that's a challenge. And then how do we continue to operate when we don't have people in contact with other people physically? And so the main, basically there are three things that we knew we needed to do. One was we needed to suspend all operation that would increase the risk of spreading the virus or harming it. We needed to adapt programs to be delivered online or in some other mode, which is particularly difficult for our work with a lot of New Haven families, like New Haven public school kids, because there was uncertainty about what kind of technology households had or what sort of connectivity they had. And then the third area was what new programs do we need to develop to either respond to this particular urgent need or to replace what people can't do. So things like more guided, so deep dive and learning about the work that they're doing, or more reflection time. And so currently we have what we're developing is move our school-based programming online or through other technology. And as I said, that's a challenge. The public schools did a survey, and so far the results show that about 30% of New Haven households don't have technology or connectivity, or they didn't respond to the survey, which could be because they don't have technology. We also, a lot of students are shifting the focus of their work to how the coronavirus is affecting the particular population that they're working with. So for example, students who were working with incarcerated people in Connecticut have been working on how to get, how to meet the particular needs of the incarcerated population, encouraging the governor to consider releasing pretrial detention people who are being held, or people who are eligible for parole. And then other two areas I'll just mention quickly. As you probably know, we run a lot of fellowships. It's a big thing, a big part of our programming. And we're figuring out how to shift the fellowship experience over to, you know, people who are now at home, you know, in their living rooms. And that's challenging more on the nonprofit side, because the nonprofits are themselves scrambling and they're scattered and they're dealing with all the things that the previous panelists mentioned. And so the last thing we want to do is kind of overwhelm them with our demands around how do we keep the fellowships functioning. But this is also a great opportunity for nonprofits either to get some valuable assistance that they need this time, or to focus on things that they normally wouldn't have to deal with, but this is a chance to explore. And then lastly, I just want to mention something I think Don would really appreciate. There have been some really great collaborations going on across Dwight Hall groups. One in particular is Havenly, which is a program that provides job training experience in the culinary arts for refugee women. They were considering opening a storefront as a part of a sort of revenue stream and job training experience. And they were actually able to find a good location and take over the lease of a local business that was planning to move out. And then they were not sure what to do with this kind of uncertain environment. And I reached out to YHAP and said, you know, there's a good alignment of missions here. Maybe you guys can talk. And so we convened a little meeting, and YHAP has decided that they are going to provide a grant to help them sort of underwrite the first month of rent, just so that they're not, you know, at risk. and then they're going to give them a short-term loan of an initial month, which they'll have to pay off in a couple months. So it was a really great opportunity to see collaboration. And the other thing I really love about it is that the participants in the program, the refugee women, have a lot of very valuable experience and knowledge around situations like this. And so for them to be able to now provide free, healthy, nutritious meals for the downtown Eating Soup Kitchen and some other kitchens around town is a really nice way to be able to activate a part of our community that has something really important to offer. Just before I turn it over to Sasha, I just want to acknowledge that we have past board chair Connie Royster and our current board chair Bradford Williams, and also board member Carl Eifler and several staff members on the call. So thank you all for coming. And Sasha can tell us about the unique work that the student leadership team has been working on.
Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Is it good? Okay. As Peter mentioned, I'm one of the co-coordinators of the Student Executive Committee at Dwight Hall, and we support day-to-day operations at Dwight Hall alongside staff members. So we work on various different projects, but as we know, we've had to make a lot of changes due to the last couple of weeks, and since Yale students are now all over the country and the world. So I'd like to briefly share some of the changes that we've made to our programs. One of the biggest things that the executive committee works with are member groups or student-led undergraduate organizations that work on a variety of issues from reproductive justice and environmental advocacy to homelessness awareness. And a lot of these member groups provided direct services to their community partners in New Haven. And as executive committee, we're trying to help them organize virtual opportunities and programs with these partners. So I'd like to highlight some of them, including the Refugee and Immigrant Student Education Program, which is developing online forms of tutoring to work with public school students and local families. The Yale Undergraduate Prison Project is working with New Haven reentry organizations and Dwight Hall's Yale Prison Education Initiative to fundraise and advocate, as Peter said, for current and recently incarcerated people that may be especially affected by the pandemic. And again, the Yale Homeless and Hunger Action Project has transferred their volunteer income and tax assistance program online. So we've seen a lot of good work from the member groups at Yale. And now, as the executive committee, we're trying to think of ways to reallocate funding that was usually for member groups' direct services to now go towards community partners that are on the front lines of food distribution, healthcare, and various other services. And we're also trying to strategize ways to fundraise for smaller necessities like background checks for students who, for instance, want to virtually tutor New Haven students one-to-one online. Some of the other events that we've been working on are a virtual day of service. So Dwight Hall has held days of services once a semester in the past, where hundreds of Yale students would get together on a Saturday morning and do various tasks for community partners. So we definitely can no longer do that, but we've been brainstorming ideas to hold a virtual day of service where students can perform online services like research, translation, graphic design, or social media outreach. And we're hoping this remains a platform that students can continue to collaborate and engage with among various students and also community partners. And then we're doing smaller projects like focusing on compiling and disseminating information about petitions, fundraisers, advocacy movements, especially focusing on New Haven. For instance, we're doing a lot of work advocating for part-time and full-time Yale staff members who work in services like dining that may no longer have jobs. And we're creating a platform so that both Yale students and community members can access these resources and information. And if needed, they'll be able to mobilize in the upcoming weeks if we see as the pandemic worsens. So in general, as previously mentioned, it's been a difficult time for Yale students as they've been having to face a lot of circumstances like new time zones, family and economic responsibilities, unequitable situations and like academic standards. And at the same time, community partners have been adjusting to funding changes and increase in needs of services, but also a decrease in their volunteer base. So for different communities in Dwight Hall, this has been a very difficult time. But I think in general, Dwight Hall and the Student Executive Committee has adapted fairly quickly and creatively responded, I think, to the needs of New Haven and student communities. And we're just focusing on collaborating with each other, putting out resources and information as it comes and as it changes. And I think personally, as a student leader, and I think this is true for a lot of student leaders around campus, especially the younger ones, this is one of the first experiences that we've had that have been so jarring, and that has just changed everything so quickly. This has been a pretty good opportunity to learn, to adapt, to grow, just know how to change to circumstances, but also keep the broader vision and mission of our organizations in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I've got to say, Sasha, you and Tim, you're both Dwight Hall members, but you just give all of us alums so much pride in looking at your resilience, the vision, how you're taking this experience and converting a classic crisis into an opportunity. So thank you. You inspired all of us. Want to sign off tonight. Stay tuned for more of these town halls as early as next month, April 29th. There will be no more meetings in person for the foreseeable future, so stay tuned for more announcements. And again, tonight's town hall has been recorded. You can get copies of that on the YANA website, I think in a day or two, as well as all the slides that were mentioned tonight.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone. And
I just wanted to say,
just a shout out to Rachael,
I'll be
Joellyn.
collecting resources that all the speakers mentioned. So if you haven't already sent them to me via chat, if you could email them, or I'll rewatch the video and pull them out. So when I do the write up and we'll edit down the video, people will get all that information. And if anybody thinks of anything else to add to resources or something you want to share, please let us know. And then I let people know that if you have questions you want to ask, if you can't get a hold of the panelists or anyone else, feel free to email me at rachel@yale-nonprofitalliance.org, including any requests for alumni or questions to students, and we'll try to help filter that as efficiently as we can. So, and thank you for everyone.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.